Hello everyone. Welcome to the unit 4 of week 1. In the last unit, we have understood different characteristics of three approaches of assessment: assessment of learning, assessment for learning, and assessment as learning. So, having an understanding of those characteristics, I think it will be useful to see how all these three approaches of assessment are brought into action inside the classroom. So that is going to be the focus for this unit. Unit outcomes are derives insights into assessment for learning, as learning, and of learning by examining classroom case study scenarios. Also, you will be able to reflect on the need to move from assessment of learning towards assessment as learning in the classroom practice. So, for this unit, we will be going through three scenarios, and in all three scenarios, we have the same faculty member handling the class and for the same topic. So, what we will do that how the same faculty member is able to practice all three approaches of assessment, how the same faculty member is able to balance between all the three approaches of assessment. So, coming to the scenario 1, let us assume that the name of the faculty member is Professor Anand. So, Professor Anand teaches an undergraduate course on environmental engineering. He is starting a module on air quality management. Before introducing the new topic, he activates prior knowledge by asking students to discuss recent air pollution incidents in their city and the measures taken to control them. He then presents the course outcome. Analyze sources of air pollution and propose strategies to mitigate their impact on urban environments. Throughout this lecture, Professor Anand pauses to ask probing questions and encourage group discussions. He collects evidence of students' understanding through short in-class activities such as concept mapping and mini-class analysis. Professor Anand provides immediate feedback, both orally and via annotated submissions in the learning management system. He uses the insights gained to adapt the next lecture, addressing misconceptions and tailoring examples to students' needs. By the end of the class, he has a clear picture of students' learning gaps and is ready to plan the upcoming sessions effectively. So, if I have to ask you that in this particular scenario, which particular approach of assessment Professor Anand is using? So, it is very clear that the approach that is taken in this scenario is forward looking, right? So, constantly Professor Anand uses the evidence gathered from the discussions, the concept maps, and also some case analysis to guide future lectures and also adapt teaching strategies. So, since it is forward looking and since the assessment is conducted by Professor Anand in a very informal manner, this kind of a scenario depicts assessment for learning. Also, it is very clear that this kind of assessment is remedial in nature because misconceptions and learning gaps are identified during the class and the instructor addresses them immediately through some examples and also through some explanations. Also, you would have observed that the assessment is happening continuously throughout the lecture. So, Professor Anand uses various methods and he is continuously assessing the students via probing questions, group discussions, and some in-class activities. So, assessment is not a single point exercise, instead, it is spread out. Also, it is important to notice that the assessment is both teacher and student oriented. So, on one hand, Professor Anand is doing several assessments. Also, students are actively participating. They are reflecting, they are discussing, and they are actively engaging with the course material. And in any of these situations, you would have observed that Professor Anand has never provided marks or graded students' response and made a judgment about students' learning. Constantly, there were qualitative feedback that was provided, sometimes orally during the discussion, and also through some annotated submissions in the learning management system. So, there was never a focus on numerical grades. Rather, the complete focus was on understanding students' learning. Right? And in the last unit, we have seen that some of the characteristics of assessment for learning are: they are forward looking, they are remedial, they are continuous, they are conducted by both teachers and students, and also some sort of qualitative feedback is provided. So, what was happening in scenario 1 was assessment for learning. Now, let us move to another scenario, scenario 2. Here also we have the same professor, Professor Anand. So, he introduces a series of self-assessment opportunities to help students reflect on their own learning. For example, students are asked to maintain a learning journal where they answer reflective questions about their understanding of air pollution, the sources of air pollution, the mitigation strategies, and case studies discussed in the class. He also provides a self-assessment checklist to guide students in evaluating their progress. So, there were certain questions in the checklist. They reads as, which topics or concepts do you feel confident about? Or which topics require further clarification or practice? How effectively were you able to apply concepts to case studies or real world problems? What strategies helped you solve problems effectively? And what could you improve? What approaches to studying or learning worked well for you in this module? What adjustments could you make to your approach for better results? How did peer or instructor feedback influence your learning? So, through these checklist questions, Professor Anand emphasizes that the ultimate goal is to cultivate students' metacognitive skills so they can monitor and evaluate their own learning. By gradually increasing the responsibility for self-assessment, students develop the habits to become independent, self-directed learners. So, any guesses? Which approach of assessment was used by Professor Anand in scenario 2? So, it is very evident that in this scenario, though Professor Anand is facilitating the process of assessment through certain checklists, but students themselves are doing the assessment. So, it is student oriented. So, they are actively monitoring and evaluating their learning. They are reflecting on the strategies and also taking responsibility for improvement with guidance from the instructor rather than direct evaluation. So, Professor Anand is not directly evaluating the students. Instead, students are evaluating themselves, right? So, with this clue, it is very clear that the approach of assessment which is used in this scenario is assessment as learning, right? Because students themselves are conducting assessment. Also, these kind of assessments are forward looking because again, there are no grades here. Students are reflecting on their understanding of air pollution concepts, and they are also planning concrete actions to improve learning in the upcoming topics or for some assignments. Also, assessment is remedial in nature because there are certain self-assessment checklists that are provided. Also, they are expected to maintain some kind of a learning journal. Okay, and both these activities will help students identify gaps in knowledge and skills, enabling targeted improvements. Also, you would have observed that the assessment is happening continuously, right? So, self-assessment is embedded throughout the module via reflective journals, checklist, and periodic reflection prompts, and they are again not limited to a single activity, right? So, in the last unit, when we were discussing about assessment as learning, we discussed that some of the characteristics of assessment as learning are they are forward looking, they are remedial, they are continuously happening, and also they are student oriented. Okay. Now moving ahead to the third scenario. Okay. Here again, we have Professor Anand with us, and at the end of the semester, he designs a comprehensive exam for the air quality management module. The exam is aligned with the course outcomes, the course content, and the cognitive levels as outlined in the assessment blueprint. Okay, and this blueprint is developed with his colleagues. Students are informed about the structure of the assessment, including total marks, time allocation, and the question types. So, there can be different question types such as multiple choice questions, case-based questions, and short answers. The objective of this summative assessment is to evaluate the student's ability to integrate and synthesize knowledge acquired throughout the course. The results are graded and they provide a clear measure of learning achievement. Professor Anand also prepares a detailed performance report highlighting overall achievement, strengths, and areas for improvement. These reports are shared with students, academic advisors, and the department to inform future curriculum planning. Professor Anand then spends time carefully reviewing the answer scripts and preparing the final grade report, ensuring that the assessment provides a holistic view of students' course outcomes. Now, from this scenario, probably it is very clear that the approach of assessment which is being used in scenario 3 is assessment of learning. So, this is summative in nature because it is happening at the end of the semester and it is backward looking. The comprehensive exam, it assesses knowledge and skills students have acquired throughout the module, right? And it is happening at the end. Also, it is non-remedial because here the primary purpose is evaluation of achievement and not providing immediate feedback. Okay, and no immediate corrective actions are provided. However, feedback can be used for future references. These assessments also happens periodically. In the current scenario, it is happening at the end of the semester. Okay, and it was some kind of a scheduled assessment event, right? And you would have observed that it is predominantly conducted by Professor Anand. Okay, so it is instructor oriented. So he designs the exam, okay. He determines the marking scheme and also assigns grades, okay. Students' participation is limited to taking the test, okay. And after the examination is conducted, okay, students' performance is reported using marks and grades, providing a numerical measure of the attainment of course outcomes. So, it is quantitative, okay. We are actually associating a grade to the extent of the attainment of the course outcome, right. So, which means in the scenario 3, assessment of learning was happening, and we have observed that since the assessment was backward looking, it was summative in nature, it was non-remedial, it was periodically happening, it was primarily instructor oriented, and it was quantitative in nature. And therefore, this kind of assessment, okay, is assessment of learning. So, in these three scenarios, we have observed that Professor Anand was using all three approaches of assessment: of learning, for learning, as well as learning. So, one conclusion that probably we can draw from this discussion is that it is possible to use all three approaches of assessment. It is possible to have a balanced approach of using all three approaches of assessment in the classroom. Okay, the result will be that students will be more aware about the course outcomes. They will be in charge of their own learning, and probably all such kind of an arrangement will help them attain the course outcomes better. Okay. I would also like to draw your attention to the current context. So, the pyramid which is there in the left side of your screen, you would have observed that the base of the pyramid is assessment of learning, which is basically trying to depict that in the current context, the most amount of focus is on summative assessment, that is assessment of learning. And then there are some limited opportunities for assessment for learning, and there are minimal approaches that are taken for self-assessment, assessment as learning. However, if we want our students to attain the course outcomes better, if we want our students to achieve the broader aims of education, if we want our students to become independent thinkers, independent learners, we would like to do more of assessment as learning. So, the focus of assessment as learning should be highest as compared to all three approaches of assessment. So, a paradigm shift will be required wherein assessment as learning is happening the most in the classes, and after that the assessment for learning, where teacher is conducting various kinds of informal assessment to provide feedback to students, and then comes assessment of learning. Because if assessment as learning and assessment for learning is done better, or if adequate amount of for learning and as learning is done in the classroom, then students' performance in assessment of learning will automatically be better. And in the process, basically we are enabling students to become reflective thinkers, more aware about their strengths and weaknesses, and basically we are helping them attain the broader aims of education, all kinds of program outcomes of the engineering education, the course outcomes, all of it will be better if assessment as learning happens more frequently in the classroom as compared to assessment of learning.